After weeks of speculation, opinion polls, and discussion, it finally happened. The French presidential election came to a close. And while the result isn't exactly a surprise, there's more to the election than might meet the eye. Having won 58% of the vote, Macron will be staying in power for the next 5 years, but it might not be as plain sailing as you first thought. Nor might it be 5 more years of the same old Macron. So in this video, we'll take a deeper look at France's post-election and what Macron's win actually means for France and for Europe. We actually first discussed this topic in yesterday's edition of the Daily Briefing, where we spoke to Le Monde's Eric Albert about the results of the election and what's to come. So if you want to stay up to date, then check out the show, because it's where we discuss the biggest stories and some that have slipped under the radar every single day. You can watch the Daily Briefing on its dedicated YouTube channel, or you can listen along by searching for the podcast in your preferred app. First things first though, let's get the actual results out of the way. According to early estimates available at the time of writing, Emmanuel Macron managed to surpass most polling predictions, garnering some 58% of the vote, with the far-right Marine Le Pen attracting just 42%. So Macron managed to get an easy win. Job done, right? Well, no, not exactly. The first thing to say here is that the sheer scale of Macron's achievement can't be understated. Macron joins just 3 other presidents to be re-elected while in office: Charles de Gaulle, François Mitterrand, and Jacques Chirac. And even then, Macron's re-election is the first time a president has been re-elected while holding a majority in the French Parliament. I.e., as the BBC put it, Emmanuel Macron is the first president in modern times who, after running every aspect of foreign and domestic policy for a full term, has once again won the trust of the people, and won their trust in spite of being bitterly controversial. On the foreign policy side, though, it goes without saying that Europe has breathed a sigh of relief. Macron has consistently been one of, if not the most Europhile of all of the candidates running for presidency, while Le Pen sought to, among other things, cut French contributions to the EU budget, renegotiate French membership of the Schengen area, and re-establish the primacy of French law over EU law. Across the EU then, Macron has been seen as somewhat of a leading light for more Europe, and for further, faster integration between member states. Having Le Pen in the driving seat then would have sent a shiver down the EU spine, for the main reason that Europe remains based on a Franco-German axis. What France and Germany say and do together becomes more or less gospel for the European Union. These 2 countries are ultimately the 2 largest economies. They're founding members, and they've played an undeniably large part in the history of European integration. A Le Pen victory would have almost immediately thrown France back into political gridlock, with the French president and prime minister drawn from separate political parties, known as cohabitation. Anyway, in his victory speech, Macron acknowledged that much of the support he got in the second round wasn't as much a vote for him as a vote against Le Pen and the far right, something that a number of commentators picked up on. Cas Moudet, an expert in populism, highlighted on Twitter that probably the most important aspect of the campaign, and missed in many accounts, is that in 2017 Macron won with a positive message, inspiring many French and even more Europeans. This wasn't the case in 2022 though. It was even more an anti-Le Pen vote which won the election for him.
Usually in an election, you got one camp rejoicing, another camp saying, well, it's too bad, we have said this time mostly the largest camp was relieved, just because a lot of people voted Macron despite what they really liked, but just they had no choice but to stop Marine Le Pen. That's how they felt. So it was basically a large part of French people saying, well, we don't want Marine Le Pen more than we want Emmanuel Macron. That's really what was yesterday, which is why Emmanuel Macron did not, sound like a crazy victory. It sounded more like, yes, I understand. I have now to. I have your mandate, but I now have to widen my politics, which is the message he gave yesterday.
So any conception of Macronism or some kind of Jupiterian legacy is, again, in Muda's words, pretty much dead. In 2017, Macron did manage to successfully smash the traditional French political scene. He created his own movement, and while many hoped that this movement would pick up steam and cement itself as a new party of French liberal democracy, in reality that's just not the case. The traditional left and right have both been destroyed by Macron, Le Pen and others. And Macron has instead focused on developing a centre, a platform that could be home to supporters from both the left and the right of French politics, with opposition parties subsequently forced out to the extremes, something unequivocally visible in the first round of voting. That's because in the first round of voting, Valérie Pécresse and Anne Hidalgo, candidates for the traditional centre-left and right parties, got in the region of 7% of votes combined. And in contrast, almost 60% of voters chose a radical candidate, either from the far left or far right in that first round. Regardless of Macron's successes then, after a constitutional reform in 2008, France brought in term limits, meaning that no president may serve for more than 2 consecutive terms, barring Macron from even running a third time, which poses the question, who could replace him? As we already said, the traditional parties on the left and right seem to be in terminal decline, and it's unlikely, but not impossible, that Le Pen could hold on until then. While Le Pen did manage to increase her vote share in the second round when compared to 2017, it appears that once again she was hurt by her performance in the one-on-one debate, something that will play into the hands of opponents within her own party who argue that she's holding back the cause. Regardless, Le Pen has vowed to fight on, saying in a defiant speech that I will continue to fight for France and the French people. I fear that the next 5 years will not break with the contempt and brutal policies of the last 5 years, and Emmanuel Macron will do nothing to repair the divisions in our country. In any case, it was never going to be this election that defined the next 5 years of France, because while a Le Pen victory could never be ruled out, it was consistently predicted that Macron would win re-election. The question simply being by what margin? What will actually define France going forward are the results of the parliamentary elections, set to be held in June. Currently, Macron's party holds a plurality of seats in the National Assembly, 267 out of 577, having been boosted by a honeymoon effect in 2017. So, together with allied parties, Macron has governed with an outright parliamentary majority. Yet, whether that majority and whether the honeymoon effect can work a second time round is in serious doubt.
So the next move really for Macron is to try to show that he's not as divisive a figure as he's been during the last 5 years. So Macron has a core group of supporters that's not negligible. Something like 30% of the electorate really supports Macron. But the problem is he's an incredibly divisive figure. And we saw it during the Yellow Vest movement a few years ago, or during the pandemic. A lot of people really dislike him very much. So the question is, how will he try to bring together some of the electorate, possibly by trying to appeal toward the left with more environmental friendly policies. So that's one of the key things he's done between the first and the second round, is to say, okay, on the environment, I've heard you, and I'm going to try to move forward. On the other hand, Macron does not want to let the far right get some of the center right voters. So Macron will not want to go too much away from the center right either. So what he's going to try to do for the parliamentary election is what he did for the second round, which is putting together a block of center left and center right. It's much more difficult in a parliamentary election where it's not one man, one candidate, but it is many hundreds constituencies, and therefore the weight of one personality is not as strong.
So if Macron's party don't win in Parliament once again, it's hard to predict how he'll continue to rule without such a clear majority. And if you want to be updated on this story, how Macron reacts to what's happening, and the upcoming parliamentary election, then be sure to check out the Daily Briefing, where yesterday we shared more from our interview with Le Monde's Eric Albert, and that's linked in the description. That's our new daily show, where we explain 5 news stories every single day. We pick out the big stories, the ones you ought to know about, but we also choose some smaller ones that you might otherwise miss. So if you want to be better informed about the world around you and news from all over the globe, then you really ought to subscribe. And it's only a few minutes each day, so what do you have to lose? We post a video version every weekday over on the TLDR Daily channel, so you can subscribe over there. Or you can listen along to the podcast by searching for the TLDR Daily Briefing in your favourite podcast app. Thanks for your support, and I hope you enjoy the new show.